Jerome Hirschman from the West LABA. Next Thursday, there's a neonatal M&M. And next Friday, on the 24th, there's a Learning Disabilities Do the Eyes Habit by Cheryl Handler, who's a pediatric ophthalmologist. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Gerald Newmark. Dr. Newmark is a local, which is really nice to have such an academic and a distinguished person in our area. He's the president of Newmark Management Institute. He is a parent, an educator, a behavioral scientist, and a management consultant. And throughout his long and distinguished career, Dr. Newmark has employed a combination of both common sense and the scientific method to help organizations and individuals become more effective. For 15 years, he was a human factors scientist with the System Development Corporation, where his work focused on the design, development, and evaluation of innovative training and instructional systems for both public schools and military programs. And under a 7-year Ford Foundation grant, Dr. Newmark worked with children, parents, and teachers in the Los Angeles City Schools as co-director of a project to develop a model school. The results of his effort are described in his book, This School Belongs to You and Me, Every Learner, a Teacher, Every Teacher, a Learner. And for this, he received a presidential citation. With his latest book, which I can say personally that I have read and have many copies that I hand out in the office, How to Raise Emotionally Healthy Children, Meeting the 5 Critical Needs of Children and Parents Too, Dr. Newmark has focused his attention to improving parent, child, teacher, family, and school relations. I believe that he has, in his adult life, been involved in many civil and youth affairs. He has many credentials and has been involved in a large number of organizations. And rather than going on with this, I think it's best to listen to hear what he has to say. Let's introduce Dr. Newmark.
Thank you, Ken. As Ken said, I feel like I'm in home territory. My office is on Ventura Boulevard between Caro's and the Bank of America, so it's nice not to have to travel far. The other thing is, I think there are at least a half a dozen or maybe closer to 10 of the physicians of Tarzana and Sino who have taken care of me over the years and have kept me in pretty good condition. So I'd like to publicly thank them for their care, concern, and excellent treatment. Some of them are here now. I won't go through the list, there are too many. But I am in very good shape. I'd like to introduce my wife, Deborah Newmark, who's director of our children's project. And she's responsible for distributing in the last 2 years over 65,000 books. Those of you who have not gotten a complimentary copy of the book, see Deborah before you leave. And those of you who would like to get more copies to give as gifts at $2 a book, see Deborah at the end of my talk. About a month ago, I ran into an old friend of mine, hadn't seen him in a while, and he asked me what I had been doing. And I told him I had been doing a lot of traveling in relation to the book. I've been to Japan, I've been to Mexico, and it's been very exciting. And he said, I thought you were retired. That's what I had heard. He says, you sound so busy. And I said, I am retired. And then I gave him my definition of being retired. Being retired is when you're doing what you want to do and you don't have to. And since I don't have to, and I'm doing exactly what I want to do, and I can't think of anything else I would rather be doing at this time than talking to people about the emotional health of children. It's interesting. I've been talking publicly for at least 3 decades. And every time I get up for a new group, and even though this is home territory, I'm still a little nervous. And sometimes it's for good reason. I was featured speaker at a high school graduation, and I was pacing up and down outside the auditorium, and I was going over in my mind what I was going to say. And this young senior comes up to me who's graduating, and she says, are you Dr. Newmark? I said, I think so. She said, would you please do me a favor today? I said, sure, what is it? She said, please don't be boring. We've had so many boring speakers at this school. That's not something you want to hear at this time. And a couple of months ago, I was speaking at a teachers' conference, and I was the after-lunch speaker. And this gentleman comes up to me and he says, "Are you the speaker after lunch?" This time I was more definitive. I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "I don't know if I can stay. I have another appointment. Will you have anything important to say?" I was thinking, give me a break. I said, "No, I'm going to be superficial the way I usually am." As a matter of fact, my brother and I wrote a book not too long ago called Happiness Through Superficiality, but that's a whole other story. I want to assure you that what I have to say I feel is extremely important, because how to raise emotionally healthy children deals with what I consider one of the most serious problems facing our nation, and one of the most under-recognized problems, and that is the neglect of the emotional health of children. Failure to meet the emotional needs of children is jeopardizing their future and the future of our country. But I'm not here just to talk about the problem. I want to talk about solutions. And I'd like to begin by talking about parenting in general, to provide a context for my discussion of emotional health. The first thing that comes to my mind is that parenting is probably the most important responsibility any of us will ever have in a lifetime. On the other hand, it's also one of the most stressful, anxiety-provoking, difficult, and complex responsibilities we'll ever have. And I've asked myself over the years, why is parenting so difficult? Mankind, or womankind, has had thousands of years of experience. You'd think by now we'd have it down pat. But of course, we don't. It is very difficult. And I've identified, I think, four main reasons. There are a lot more of why it's so difficult. One is the multiple tasks and roles that a parent has to perform. I came across a want ad that was tongue-in-cheek, but there's a lot of validity to this. And it said, "Wanted parent, cook, dishwasher, house cleaner, coach, doctor, nurse, chauffeur, teacher, entertainer, therapist, laundress, repairman, maid. 24 hours a day, no pay, no vacations." So I ask you, who would be dumb enough to take a job like that? A lot of us. Not only that, it doesn't end with your kids being grown up. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke at a conference sponsored by the Department of Aging to 200 grandparents who now have full responsibility for their children, and this is growing. So once you're a parent, it seems like you're a parent for the rest of your life. Secondly, we come to it without any training. There's no manual, there's no instruction. And thirdly, we're not just parents. We have other relationships with our own parents, with relatives, with friends. We have jobs. Sometimes in the family, both spouses are working. We have problems. We have financial problems, medical problems, all kinds of problems. And then there are all these outside influences over which we have maybe little control. There's the internet, there's television, there are movies, there are the peer groups, and it goes on and on. And today, there's all the anxiety and fear about terrorism and an uncertain future, which all impinge on our role as parents. And fourthly, and a very important one is, we really don't consider or give enough consideration to our role as parents. When I was interviewing parents for the book, I would ask this question, and you might think about how you would have answered it when you first became a parent. I said, how often do you and your spouse get together and ask the question, how well are we doing as parents, and what could we be doing differently or better? How often? And you know what the answer was? What do you think the main answer was? Never. Never. And that didn't surprise me, because when my son was growing up, if you asked me that question, I would have given the same answer. I wouldn't have thought of it. But think about it. Here's the most important responsibility we'll ever have in a lifetime, and we don't step back and say, how are we doing? What could we be doing differently? Because of these factors, what we find is that most parents lack confidence, are often frustrated and overwhelmed. And most parenting is haphazard, inconsistent, and unfocused. And if this situation is going to change, then it is very important that parents become more knowledgeable, more thoughtful, and more focused. We ran into some friends last year in Paris, and we started to talk about parent-child relations. And the husband said to us, you know, it was very interesting. His mother was 85 years old, and they were over visiting her, and she said to him, son, was I a good parent? That's the first time that ever came up. She wanted to know at the end of her life whether she had been a good parent. Interesting, isn't it? Well, let's focus now. Let's focus on emotional health. And here again, my general premise is that most of the problems in the world are not technical problems, they're people problems. We know how to put a man on the moon. There are new scientific discoveries weekly or daily. But when it comes to getting along with each other, treating each other in emotionally healthy ways, it seems as though we live in the dark ages. When do we pay attention to a child's emotions? When? We don't pay attention to them in school. We don't pay attention to them at home. When there's some violence in the school, when there's some shooting and some teachers and kids get killed, or when we have 9/11, then we find that we send numerous human relations specialists into the schools, and we ask the kids, how are you feeling? What are you thinking? Do you have any questions? And we try to comfort them. And you know how long that lasts? About 2 weeks. And then emotional health is not addressed again. Rarely, unless the kid is having some sort of major difficulty. And I've given this a name. I call it the hidden agenda, the missing agenda, because this is not discussed at all. And the missing agenda has serious consequences. We look at the so-called at-risk kids, millions of them, who go through their school years confused, angry, anxious, hostile, depressed, and some of them turn to violence, and others drop out of school or turn to drugs or become teenage parents. But that's the tip of the iceberg. What about all the other kids who are academically successful and don't get into any serious trouble? I include myself and probably many people here. They have some of the same concerns as the other kids, the same confusion, the same anxiety. When do we find out about this? We find out about it when they grow up into unhappy, troubled adults. All we have to do is to look at the divorce rate. 50% of marriages end up in divorce. The number of people who turn to alcohol and drugs. The number of people who are depressed or are receiving treatment for mental health. The last statistic I read was that there are over 45 million people receiving treatment for mental health problems. So we have serious problems. Not only that, but we pass on these problems from one generation to the next, from parent to child. So that's the bad news. What's the good news? The good news is that we can do something about it. And essentially, that's why I wrote the book. That's why I wrote How to Raise Emotionally Healthy Children. I wrote the book because I want to accomplish two things. One is to raise public awareness about the problem, to get people talking about it, to become aware of it. And secondly, I wanted to provide a tool, a practical tool that parents and teachers and child care providers could use to create emotionally healthy environments where people treated each other in emotionally healthy ways. I wanted them to have this tool that would enable them to answer three questions. One is, what do I want for my child in the area of emotional health? What are my goals? Again, when I would ask parents, what are your goals in regard to emotional health? They said, what goals? And again, when my son was growing up, I didn't have any goals. Yes, maybe I had one goal. That was to get through the day without any traumatic incident. And the second question is, if I had goals, what's my strategy? What's my philosophy? What's my approach to child rearing? Do I have one? I certainly didn't have one. I came home at night from work, and I did what was in front of me. Usually it was, talk to your son, my wife would say. And then I got home, talk to your son. Then I knew that, I had something to do. And the third thing is, how do I know how well I'm doing along the way? How do I assess how I'm doing as a parent so that I can make constructive changes? Let's go back to the first question. What are the goals? In my work, I've identified 5 critical emotional needs. And those are the need to feel respected that all children have. All children have throughout their lives. The need to feel respected, the need to feel important, the need to feel accepted, the need to feel included, and the need to feel secure. And if we recognize these needs and we understand them, then we don't have to continue to be reactive. We can be proactive in making things happen, making positive things happen, and building a positive family environment and climate. Let's review these 5 needs briefly. First need is the need to feel respected. Here we're talking about the need to feel that I am being treated in a courteous, polite, considerate, and civil way. That's all we're talking about. As a child, we hear all the time, respect your elders, respect your parents, respect your teachers. The best way to learn about respect is to learn what it feels like when you're being treated respectfully, and also to be around adults who are treating each other respectfully. That's one of the most important ways. And so many times we treat children disrespectfully and we're not even aware of it. I was visiting a friend of mine, and he was having a conversation with his 8-year-old son. The son was in the middle of saying something when the phone rang. And the father got up, walked away to the phone, picked it up, and became engaged in a long conversation. At one point, the kid came over and wanted to say something. He said, "Daddy," and his father started screaming at him. "Don't be rude. Can't you see I'm on the telephone?" Well, who was being rude? The father or the son? I would think it's the father. What if the father had said to the son, "Excuse me, son, I want to see who this is." And when we got on the telephone, he said, "Gee, I'm sorry. I can't talk to you now because I'm having a conversation with my son." And the son heard that. How would that make the son feel? Important, respected? In so many ways. When we lie to kids, when we tell them we're doing something for their own good, when we know it's for our own convenience, when we make promises that we know we're not going to keep, when we talk about them in front of them as though they didn't exist and weren't there and embarrass them, when we yell at them, when we call them names, selfish, stubborn, you'll never amount to much. When I was growing up in the streets of New York, the saying was, "Sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me." Not true. Names make an imprint, and sometimes they last a long time. So we need to show kids respect and go back to basics. Often we're with adults and they're telling children at a dinner table, "Say please, say thank you," but the adults aren't doing it to the kids. So we have to learn how to say please, thank you, you're welcome, I'm sorry, and on and on. Kids have a need to feel respected, and the best way is to surround them with people who are treating each other with respect and treat them respectfully. The second need is the need to feel important. Here we're talking about the need that all kids have, all people have that. The need to feel that I have value, that I am useful, that I am somebody. And we see this need at a very early age. You get into an elevator, and there's a small tot there, and you want to press the button, they say, "No, no, me." They want to do things. They want to be useful. And so often we get in their way. We want to do it for them. It's easier than to show them how. I was having breakfast with a young mother and her small child. He was sitting in a high chair. And he was trying to feed himself, and he was getting it over his bib and some of his clothes. And she grabbed the spoon out of his hand and said, "Give me that. Look, you're making a mess." I mean, she was yelling at him. And I thought she should be putting her arm around him and say, isn't it wonderful, you're trying to feed you. Maybe I can help you a little bit. Or the junior high student who tells us that she came out second in a swim meet and her parents made her feel like a failure. I think about the Olympics. Our Olympic athletes train for years and years and years. And if they don't win the gold medal, even if they come out and win a silver medal, they come home and they feel like failures, and then they have to train for 4 more, 8 more years. Just think about it. You may be second in the world in something and feel like a failure. There's something wrong here with what we're teaching our children. When we think about it, there are so many ways to make children feel important. Some of them are very simple. Just start asking their opinions about things. You'd be amazed at what you get back. At all ages, even very young. And give them choices and get them involved in decisions. You don't suddenly start becoming a good decision maker at the age of 21 or 40 or 60 or 80. All of us know people who are not making good decisions and they're in their 80s and 60s and 90s. You get it by having experience at making small decisions and then having to be able to learn about the consequences of those decisions. I like what one family did. I was doing a workshop for parents, and these parents told how they went about assigning chores and responsibilities in the family. What they did is they had a family meeting, and they talked about all the things that this family had to do in order to function. They talked about it as a family, as a community, and I like that concept, as a family, as a community. And at the end of the meeting, everybody had an assigned responsibility that they agreed upon. One child was put in charge of the dog, and he received a title. He was called Director of Animal Husbandry. Not bad for a small kid. But not only that, he had to come up with a budget of the money he needed to do that job. And then the family would pass on the budget, and then he'd have to spend that money and report on it later on. And one child was a safety inspector, and she had numerous jobs to go around and make a list of all the potential hazards in the house. And she was doing fine until she decided she wanted to have a fire drill at 1 in the morning. It didn't go over, especially since her father was a doctor and who had just gotten in. Well, it was easy for him. He was up already. So kids have a need to feel important. And this whole notion of a sense of community, of being part of a community, where each of us is interdependent, and each of us has needs. Not only the children have these 5 needs, parents have these needs. This is a concept that should be explained and demonstrated to kids very early on and repeated often. And you can talk about major responsibilities. Kids have major responsibilities related to school and parents related to working. So kids have a need to feel important. And if we don't find constructive ways to make them feel important, they will find destructive ways to get attention, to feel that I am somebody. And then there's the need to feel accepted. Here we're talking about the need to feel that I'm being treated as a unique individual who has a right to my own ideas, opinions, feelings, emotions, wants. And if we don't recognize that, if we ignore a kid's feelings, if we trivialize them, if we put them down because they express an opinion that we don't like, we're cutting off communication. You're not going to have much communication with that child. And communication in the family is extremely important. But most communication seems to be one way, from the top down. And that has to change. I was doing a workshop for teenagers. Let me give you some examples of how that works. And I asked them, what are some of the problems you have with your parents? And one kid told a story about having dinner. It was around graduation time. And he told his parents, he said, you know, a couple of the guys and I, we got together, and we were talking about what we wanted to do after the prom. And we came up with the exciting idea that we wanted to sleep overnight at the Santa Monica beach. And he said, you'd think that I had said I wanted to join Al-Qaeda and fight the United States. They said, what are you, crazy? You know how many muggings there are in Santa Monica? And then they wouldn't listen. They got up and walked out. Now just think about that. Did this kid do anything? All he expressed was a desire. And the language we use, what are you, crazy? Now, of course, the parents didn't mean that, but the message is, if you have that kind of a desire, there must be something wrong with you. But if we accept that kid's right to have his own desires and feelings, then we say something different. We say, gee, I guess it would be fun. I guess it would be exciting to spend the night on the beach. But I would have a problem with it. I don't think I'd be able to sleep. And I'm going to have to sleep on that one and think about it. Let's talk some more about it. And then maybe you can negotiate something. Maybe the kids will say, well, Mom, why don't you and Dad come down and sleep on the beach too, but you just stay a mile away. But at least it's your problem, and you can work that out with the kid. Deborah and I were having Thanksgiving dinner with a relative. At the end of the meal, the father said we were having dessert. And the father says to his son, Eric, play something for us on the piano. I'm sure everybody would like to hear you play. I didn't want to hear him play. I had heard him once. If I never heard him again, it would be too soon. But he said, everybody would like to hear you play. And the kid said, oh, Dad, I don't feel like it. He said, I didn't ask you how you felt. I said, play something on the piano. And the kid says, I don't feel like it. He says, damn it, I go to work every day. I don't feel like going to work every day. Who cares? And sometimes we don't recognize that these kids have feelings. Do we want them to be robots and we say something and they snap to it? One of my pet peeves when I was growing up was when we had relatives over, aunts and uncles. And my mother would say, Jerry, I was just very small. Here, kiss Auntie. And she'd come down and push me towards my aunt. I didn't want to look at her, let alone kiss her. And when I resisted, I was scolded for it. Kids have a need to feel accepted, and we have to recognize them as unique individuals. Another thing I hated was when my mother would say to me, why aren't you like your brother Irving? Irving, for those of you who know him, he was the good one in the family. And so I had to put up with that. The fourth need is the need to feel included. And here we're talking about the need to feel a connection to other people, the need to feel that you belong, the need to feel a sense of community. John Gardner, a former Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, once said, the problem with our cities is that they are not communities. They are encampments of strangers. They're not communities. And sometimes that's the way families are, encampments of strangers. So how do you develop this sense of connectedness? There are so many influences out there. It's so important for the family to be a close unit. The kids need it. It adds to their security. You do it by doing things together. What do kids do? They join cliques, they join gangs, they join teams, because they're looking for that. In the back of the book, in Appendix A, I list 150 different categories of activities. And we suggest that families get together and choose some activities that everybody can enjoy. It's not good just for the kids to enjoy it. This is where, parents are taking kids to events and then watching, or parents doing something with kids where they're bored. There was a survey done recently of high school students and junior high school students, and they said they wanted to spend more meaningful time with their parents, but they wanted it to be something that their parents were enjoying too. Who wants to be around people who are bored all the time? And there are so many activities. You can have various evenings where you're doing board games or watching a video or a movie, or have a joke or humor evening, or a question and answer evening. There's a book I recommend, Questions for Kids, in the book. And I like what some of the people do with that. They make up their own questions. And in one family, they were dealing with the question, you're walking down the street and you find a wallet. And you open it up, and in it is a $100 bill. What do you do with it? A, you take it to the nearest police station and turn it in. B, you go home to your parents and ask them what to do. Or C, you take the money out, throw the wallet away, find your friends, and go out and have a good time. How many here would select A, take it to the police station? You guys all come from New York. Landsman. is when a kid says C, you take the money and throw it away, then they get a lecture. Same parents who said, who would do C themselves are giving the kid a lecture. And they say, that's not honest, that's very bad, you shouldn't do that. Why not simply ask the kid a question like, why would you do that? Find out how he's thinking, where he's at. One kid said, well, if I took it down to the police station and turned it into them, it would never get back into the hands of the person who lost it. The policeman would take it. Better me than him. And that kid's smart. At least then you can have a discussion about honesty and about ethics. It might even end up with a visit to the police station to meet real policemen. Some of these kids have never met one unless it was on the way to jail. So there are many things that you can do to develop the sense of community. One of the most important things that we recommend is another type of family meeting. We call it a feedback session. And a feedback session is a session where this group, this family, this community gets together and they ask a very simple question. How are we doing together? What do we see each other doing that's helping or hindering us to live a happy, healthy life? And then everyone has a chance to express themselves freely. And there are some ground rules about you can say anything you want with impunity in the feedback session. You can express just really how you're feeling and try to develop a climate where people can be honest and you don't have to get defensive. And we suggest that parents role model the behavior they want. They might start out by saying, okay, let's talk about things we did this week that we're not proud of. Here's something I did this week. It could be at work, it could be within the family. And so they set the tone, and then they give the kids a chance to say that. So they start seeing their parents more as human beings rather than as these paragons of virtue and knowledge. As human beings. And the kid learns that it's okay to admit that you lied, that you made a mistake. Or you could start the session by saying, what did I do this week that you liked or didn't like? And then you start exchanging ideas about that. In one of the schools I worked at this Ford Foundation grant that I had for 7 years, every teacher in every classroom held a feedback session once a week. And I remember sitting in and observing one of them where the teacher started by saying, what did I do this week that you liked or didn't like? And one kid raised his hand and he said, I didn't like it when Mary cried. And the teacher said, well, what didn't you like? He said, only girls and sissies cried. It bothered me. You should have stopped her. And the teacher started a discussion. And many of the boys said the same thing. Yeah, only girls and sissies cry. This was the third grade. And one of the kids in the back of the room raised his hand, a third grader, and he said, teacher, I think girls cry on the outside and boys cry on the inside. What an insight from a third grader. So these kind of sessions are very important in the family getting close. Deborah and I have been married for 20 years, and we have a feedback session, just the two of us, every Sunday. We set aside time. Not that we don't talk to each other during the week, but if something is bothering us, we save it until Sunday, and then we bring it up. Now, at the beginning, when we first got together, maybe it was something that was bothering us about the other person, but now it's mainly about ourselves. I'll say, gee, you know, when I did this, I didn't feel good about it. How did you feel about that? And I think this has contributed tremendously to our family. And my son, who visits us every weekend, we always end the weekend by saying, what were the highlights, what were the lowlights? And we have a discussion. So kids have a need to feel included. And the more the family can do that, the more they're going to be able to resist some of the negative influences in society. And the fifth need is the need to feel secure. We oversimplify in our society. We confuse discipline with security. Discipline is a part of security. But when I'm talking about security, and it's only one part, when I'm talking about security, I'm talking about creating an environment where people care for each other and show it, where people speak to each other and listen to each other and are able to express themselves without fear and where people feel safe and protected. And here what's very important to security is how the adults are getting along with each other. If the parents are arguing and bickering all the time, it makes kids feel very uncomfortable and very insecure. We've had kids tell us about that, and some of them would say, not only that, what's worse is we never see them make up. And then there's affection. It's important to see people showing affection, hugging and saying nice things. I know in my family, my mother and father were loving people, they were good people, but we never saw them hug or say those things to each other. Just didn't do it. Rituals and traditions are important to establish. They add to security. How you begin the day, the week, the month, and how do you end it? Parents will tell us that their day begins by the mother or father going into the room, and start in a menacing tone saying to the kid, get up, you're going to be late for school. If you don't get up this minute, you're not going to get your allowance this week, or you're not going to get dessert money. And that's the way the day starts, sort of chaotic. One teenager said, that isn't the way my day starts. She said, my mother comes in, she strokes my head, she says, sweetheart, it's time to get up. You can be late for school. And then she yells at me. But at least she's moving in the right direction. What about discipline? Discipline is important. Every community needs rules and regulations and consequences. We couldn't exist without it, and so does a family. But what's wrong with having a family meeting and asking the question, okay, what are the rules and limits that we need in this family? And there should be a reason for every rule. And if there isn't a reason, why should you have it? And it's a changing and a growing thing that can change over time. And there should be consequences. But also for the parents. One of the things kids complain to us about, I was over at Camino Real not too long ago, they say our parents are hypocritical. It's, do as I say, not as I do. They don't actually say that even, but the kids see it. They see what's happening. And it's interesting because when I bring this up with parents, they often will say, well, if I did that, wouldn't I lose authority? Wouldn't I lose control? After all, this is not a democracy. It's an interesting contradiction that people don't think about. We're raising our kids to participate in a democratic society by raising them in autocratic schools and autocratic homes. What an opportunity to have them involved in that kind of thinking, to justify these rules and reasons and consequences. And consequences shouldn't be punishment. Consequences that remind us of why we have the rule in the first place. And there's no loss of authority. And parents can make it clear to kids that there is a final authority. If they can't agree on a certain rule and a parent feels it's important, it's not negotiable. They'll understand that, especially if they're participating in most other things. So you can say, okay, no smoking cocaine in the living room. Actually, no smoking cocaine anywhere. But there are certain things that are not negotiable. Another thing that causes kids to be insecure is parents worrying. When parents are obsessed with the kids and are on them every minute of the day, where are you going, what are you doing? Not conversing with them, but grilling. Not sharing their lives with the kids, but trying to control the kid's life while the kid's fighting for independence. We worry too much. And I tell parents that one of the greatest things you can do for kids is to neglect them. Not exactly. One of the things you can do is be a relaxed, happy person who's interested in life and enjoying it. That your life isn't wrapped up in the kids. And this is hard to do. It's hard to let go of worrying. My brother and I come from a world-class family of warriors. My mother was the best. Irv and I were lecturing around the country for a while, and we were on our way to Denver. And we stopped off at her apartment in Encino to say goodbye. And we got on a plane, and we arrived at Denver, and I guess we went into the hotel room. It must have been about 11 o'clock Los Angeles time. The minute we walked into the hotel room, the phone rang. Who was it? Mom. She wanted to know how we were doing. Irv got on the phone, and he got into a conversation with her. And she said, "What's Jerry doing?" He said, "Jerry, he's watching television." She said, "He had a cold when he left Los Angeles. It's 11 o'clock. He should be in bed already." My brother said, "Mom, the kid is 56 years old. He can decide when to go to bed." That's how old I was at the time. One other thing about security. Parents tell us that they have these same 5 needs. And if we treated each other in ways that made each other feel respected, important, accepted, included, and secure, our relationship would be stronger. We'd be better role models for the kids, and the kids would be more secure. Thinking about the 5 critical needs, that concept, it calls for parents to have a different orientation, a different perspective. And that perspective is they have to be spending as much time thinking about their own behavior as they are about the kids' behavior. And the emphasis has to be away from just reacting, observing, and correcting to identifying needs and satisfying those needs. Now, if these concepts make sense, I ask parents, what's going to get in your way of implementing these? And they'll say, time. There's not enough time. Patience. When I ask parents, what do you like the least about yourself as a parent? They usually say, my lack of patience. My lack of patience. Habit, breaking old habits and trying to do something new. So we have a chapter in the book that deals with that. It's called Becoming a Professional at Parenting. And professionalism is defined by 4 characteristics. One is making conscious decisions and turning that into a commitment and a priority. And the second is having a game plan. And in the book, in that chapter, there are 12 different game plans that cover all of the 5 needs, and we suggest that they use them, modify them, come up with your own game plans. And the third characteristic is becoming a student of your own behavior. Excuse me. In our society, all of us are very good students of everybody else's behavior. Husbands know what wives should do to make things better, wives, husbands. Doctors know what patients should do, patients know what doctors should do. And on and on. The hardest thing is for us to step back and look at ourselves. If you take a look at professional athletes, do they get any feedback? Oh, they get a lot of feedback. They have personal trainers, personal coaches. They make videotapes. They study them. They discuss it with their teammates. Well, being a parent is much more difficult and complex, but where do we get feedback? We don't get much. We get as much feedback as doctors do from patients. So we suggest to parents, the first place to begin is to become a student of your own behavior. And we suggest, and you have a copy of this questionnaire that's in the book also, and we say take 15 minutes a night and answer these questions. Which of my actions today were positive in regard to my child's emotional needs? And the second one is, which of my actions were negative? And the third is, what did I learn today about myself, about my own attitudes, behavior, strengths, and weaknesses? What did I learn? And fourth is, if I were doing today over again, what would I do differently? And then we guarantee them. I say, you do that for 30 days, you'll learn more about yourself as a parent and more about your child and more about what you might be doing differently than probably in the last year or more. And it's a guarantee. If that doesn't happen, you call Deborah and she'll give you your money back for the book. Since you didn't pay for the book, that's not going to be very difficult. And the fourth characteristic is having an experimental attitude. And here what we're talking about is a view of life as nothing but one big experiment. That's all we're doing here. We get up every day. It's not a conscious experiment, but we're saying if you have that view, you'll make it that. You're experimenting. You're trying things. And if they don't work, you don't become a victim and say, poor me, it's happening to me again. You know, like the Chicago Cubs and the Boston Red Sox. They have that victim complex. No, you say, what am I going to be doing differently next year? But as a parent, you say, what am I going to be doing again tomorrow? but differently. In any two-party relationship, if you're not getting what you want, you have to take 100% of the responsibility to do something differently. Common sense tells you that. Because if you're still not getting what you want, then it's not working. Why would you keep doing the same thing? In working with parents, I would ask them to tell me what are some of the problems with kids, and then we'd take a look at one of them. And they'd say, getting my kid to keep his room clean. And I say, what have you tried? And they'll say, we've tried everything. Nothing works. What have you tried mainly? Nagging and threatening. How long have you been doing that? 4 or 5 years. Is it working? No. Why do you keep doing that? If you were in business, would you keep producing something that isn't selling or that's defective? That's why so many relationships go bankrupt, because we keep trying to change the other person and we keep doing things in the same way. So having an experimental attitude. Now, one of the things I would like to see as a result of reading the book, that people will experiment with the concept of the family as a community, with the concept of becoming a student of your own behavior, with the concept of applying the 5 critical needs to everybody you meet, not just to children, to all relationships, and use that to make progress, to improve things. I'd like to end this before the question period by reading a statement, it's a cartoon by Pfeiffer, and he captures the idea of the difference between an amateur and a professional. And what he says is, I guess this is a man in his 50s who's going through a midlife crisis and he's thinking out loud. And what he says is, when I get passed over for a job promotion that I've long deserved, I wait. When my father treats me like a fool, though I'm over 40 and the father of 3, I wait. When my children disregard my counsel and shoplift, get pregnant, and get into car crashes, I wait. When my wife berates me for my ineptitude and moral cowardice, I wait. Eventually, my company will go bankrupt, my father will die, my children will go to jail, and my wife will leave me. I can't wait anymore. Amateurs wait and let things happen. Professionals act and make things happen. And I hope you will join us in this children's project in getting the book out to patients, to families, to teachers, and have people start to think and talk about emotional health. So thank you very much.